The organ's deep notes reverberated through St. Michael's Cathedral as I stood at the altar, my hands trembling against the ivory silk of my wedding dress. 200 faces stared back at me, friends, family, colleagues, all waiting for the moment I would become Mrs. James Wilson. The late morning sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows across the marble floor. But my heart wasn't racing with joy. It was hammering with a terrible, crushing knowledge that threatened to split me in two. How long had they been lying to me behind the sea of expectant faces? I could see my mother in the front pew, her emerald dress perfectly coordinated, her smile radiant. She looked like the picture of maternal pride. 24 hours ago, I would have believed that smile. 24 hours ago. I still lived in a world where mothers protected their daughters and love meant something sacred. James squeezed my hand, his blue eyes warm with what I had once believed was devotion. "You ready for this, Rebecca?" he whispered, his voice carrying that familiar confidence that had first drawn me to him 3 years ago. I looked into his face, the sharp jawline I'd traced with my fingers, the mouth that had promised me forever, and felt my world crystallize into perfect, terrible clarity. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "More ready than you know." 3 months earlier, I had been blissfully, foolishly happy. My name is Rebecca Morgan, and at 28, I believed I had everything figured out. I was the daughter my parents had always dreamed of, graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with a degree in literature, worked as a senior editor at Meridian Publishing, and had just gotten engaged to James Wilson, the golden boy of our community. Our engagement had been a fairy tale. James, 31, and devastatingly handsome, was the son of Judge Harrison Wilson and philanthropist Victoria Wilson. He worked as a corporate attorney at one of D.C.'s most prestigious firms, drove a BMW, and had proposed to me at the Kennedy Center during intermission of Swan Lake, my favorite ballet. "You're going to have such a beautiful life together." My mother, Olivia, had gushed that night, admiring the 2-carat diamond ring that caught the light like captured starfire. "The Wilsons are such a prominent family. You've done well, sweetheart." I should have caught the way she said it. Not "you'll be happy" or "he's perfect for you," but "you've done well," as if I'd completed some sort of transaction rather than found my soulmate. My father, Pastor William Morgan, had been more reserved but equally pleased. He'd built his reputation on family values and traditional morals, and seeing his only daughter marry into such a respected family felt like a blessing on everything he'd preached for 30 years. "James is a good man," Dad had said, pulling me into one of his warm, enveloping hugs after dinner that night. "I can see how much he loves you, Rebecca. And more importantly, I can see how much you love him." Love, the word that would later taste like poison on my tongue. The wedding planning had consumed the next 2 months. My mother threw herself into the preparations with an intensity that both touched and exhausted me. She insisted on handling every detail of the flowers, the catering, the music, even my dress-fitting appointments. "This is every mother's dream," she would say, flipping through magazines and making endless phone calls. Planning her daughter's perfect wedding. I was grateful for her involvement, even when she occasionally overruled my preferences. When I suggested wildflowers for the bouquet, she insisted on white roses and peonies. When I wanted a simple string quartet, she booked a full orchestra. When I mentioned wanting to write my own vows, she convinced me that traditional vows were more elegant. "Trust me, darling," she would say with that smile I'd inherited. "Mother knows best." James seemed amused by our family dynamics. He would often drop by unannounced, charming my parents with stories from his law firm and compliments about my mother's cooking. He and Olivia would spend long minutes in the kitchen together while I finished work calls or graded manuscripts, their laughter drifting through our colonial-style house like music. "Your mother is remarkable," he told me one evening as we walked through Meridian Park. The same path where he'd first asked me to be his girlfriend. "She's so devoted to making sure everything is perfect for us." "She's always been like that," I replied, squeezing his hand. "When I was little, She'd spend weeks preparing for my birthday parties. Every detail had to be flawless. And they always were, I'm sure. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his hands framing my face. Just like you're perfect. I should have wondered why he spent so much time talking about my mother. I should have questioned the way his eyes would linger on her when she laughed, or how he always seemed to know exactly what wine to bring that would make her light up with delight. I was so in love, and love, I was beginning to learn, makes us spectacularly blind. The first crack appeared 3 weeks before the wedding. I had stopped by my parents' house after work to finalize seating arrangements, my arms full of RSVP cards and my laptop bag heavy with manuscripts. The house was unusually quiet when I let myself in through the front door. "Mom, Dad," I called, setting my bags down in the foyer. "In the kitchen, sweetheart," came my mother's voice. But there was something different about it, breathless, almost flustered. I found her standing at the sink, her back to me, washing dishes that looked suspiciously clean. Her dark hair, usually perfectly styled, was mussed, and when she turned around, her cheeks were flushed pink. "Oh, Rebecca, honey, I didn't expect you so early." "It's 6:30, I said, checking my watch. "Same time I always come on Wednesdays." Of course, of course." She dried her hands on a dish towel, avoiding my eyes. "Your father's at the church board meeting." Something felt off, but I couldn't place what. The kitchen smelled different, not like my mother's usual vanilla candles, but like something else, something masculine and expensive. "Was someone here?" I asked, settling at the kitchen island with the RSVP cards. "What? Oh, no, just me." She turned back to the sink. "How was your day?" "Darling, I almost let it go. Almost." But then I noticed something on the counter. A coffee mug that belonged to our good china set, the one we only use for special guests. It was still warm. "Mom, whose mug is this?" Her shoulders tensed. "Mine, of course. You only drink tea in the evening." I, I was feeling tired, needed the caffeine. The lie sat between us like a live wire. My mother had never been a good liar. Her tells were as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, the way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice, the compulsive dishwashing. But I loved her, and I trusted her, so I chose to believe. "Okay, madame," I said simply, opening the first RSVP card. "Let's figure out these seating arrangements." The evening proceeded normally, but something had shifted. I caught my mother glancing at her phone constantly, her fingers tapping anxiously against the counter. When James texted me around 8 to say he was working late and would see me tomorrow, I noticed the way her entire body seemed to relax. But the second crack came a week later. James had been distant, claiming work was overwhelming him. Our usual Thursday night dinners had been canceled twice, and he'd missed our cake tasting appointment with the bakery. When I called his office, his secretary said he'd left early. I drove to his apartment in Georgetown, a sleek high-rise with a doorman who knew me by name. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. I knocked on his door, then used my key when there was no answer. "James, are you okay?" The apartment was dark, but his car was in the garage. I called his name again. Walking through the space we'd already begun planning to redecorate after our honeymoon. The living room was empty, but there was a wine glass on the coffee table. Just one, but it had lipstick on the rim, a shade I didn't recognize. "James, I tried his bedroom door, but it was locked." That was strange. He never locked his bedroom door. "I'm here." His voice came through the wood, muffled and odd. I'm not feeling well. Rebecca, food poisoning, I think. Let me take care of you." No, I don't want you to catch anything. I'll call you tomorrow." "Okay." I stood there for a long moment, staring at that locked door. In 3 years together, James had never refused to let me help him when he was sick. He was the type of man who wanted to be babied when he had so much as a headache. But again, I chose trust over suspicion. "Feel better," I said to the door. "I love you. Love you too." The words came a beat too late. The truth has a way of revealing itself, like water finding cracks in a foundation. 2 days before my wedding, it came flooding through. I was at the office trying to focus on a manuscript about medieval poetry when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Rebecca, darling, I need a favor." "Of course, what's wrong?" "I left some wedding programs in my car, and I'm having lunch with Min Chin from the flower committee. Could you swing by the house and grab them? They're in my Mercedes, in a manila envelope on the passenger seat." "Sure, no problem." The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes through DC traffic. I used my key to get through the front gate and parked behind my mother's car. The Mercedes was unlocked, typical for our safe neighborhood. I opened the passenger door and immediately saw the manila envelope. But as I reached for it, something else caught my eye. A small black leather notebook had slipped between the seats. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that my name was written on the cover in my mother's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page was dated 3 months ago, just after my engagement announcement. "James Wilson is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family. Instead, I settled for William and his middle-class ministry. But maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once." The notebook slipped from my fingers. I sat in the driver's seat of my mother's car, staring at her handwriting as the world tilted sideways. With trembling hands, I picked up the notebook and continued reading. "He looks at me the way William used to before the years and the routine wore him down. When James compliments my dress or my cooking, I remember what it felt like to be desired. Today, he stayed after Rebecca left for work. We talked for hours about literature and travel. He said I was wasted on small-town life. He's right. I know this is wrong. I know what it would do to Rebecca if she found out. But when was the last time anyone chose me? Really chose me, not out of duty or convention, but out of want. Page after page, entry after entry, my mother's careful handwriting, documenting the slow, deliberate seduction of my fiancé. He kissed me today. God help me. I kissed him back. We made love in his apartment while Rebecca was at her book club. He said I was more passionate than any woman he'd ever been with. I felt alive again. James says after the wedding, we'll find a way to be together. He says marrying Rebecca is just what's expected of him, but his heart belongs to me now. The final entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding, he's coming over while William is at his bachelor party planning meeting. Our last time together before Rebecca becomes his wife. After that, we'll have to be more careful, but we've come too far to stop now. I closed the notebook and sat in perfect stillness. Around me, the suburban afternoon continued. Sprinklers watering manicured lawns, children riding bicycles, dogs barking at mail carriers. Normal life happening while my entire world crumbled. How long? The question echoed in my head. How long have they been laughing at me behind my back? I thought about every dinner where they'd sat across from each other, every family gathering where they'd exchanged looks I'd been too trusting to interpret correctly. I thought about my father planning to walk me down the aisle tomorrow, blissfully unaware that his wife was sleeping with the groom. I thought about all the ways I'd been fooled, manipulated, and betrayed by the two people who were supposed to love me most in the world. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and betrayal. I cried until my chest ached, until my mascara ran in dark streams down my cheeks, until there was nothing left inside me but a cold, crystalline clarity. They had chosen each other over me. Now I would choose myself over them. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into the Willard Intercontinental under a false name, paying cash and telling the desk clerk I was surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie came easily. Apparently, I was learning to be as good at deception as my mother and fiancé. In my hotel room, I spread everything out on the king-size bed like a detective organizing evidence my mother's journal. Screenshots of James's recent credit card statements. We'd combined our accounts for wedding expenses, and a growing list of all the signs I'd missed. The expensive cologne smell in my parents' kitchen, the lipstick on the wine glass in James's apartment, his sudden expertise in my mother's favorite wine, the way they'd both been so insistent about traditional wedding vows, probably because they knew I might say something in personal vows that would expose their guilt. I ordered room service and sat cross-legged on the bed, eating overpriced pasta while I planned their destruction. The old Rebecca would have confronted them privately. She would have cried and demanded explanations and probably would have ended up being manipulated into forgiveness. The old Rebecca believed in second chances and the power of love to overcome anything. But the old Rebecca was dead. She died reading her mother's journal in the Mercedes-Benz while her world collapsed around her. The new Rebecca understood that some betrayals were too profound for private resolution. This wasn't just about a cheating fiancé or an unfaithful mother. This was about two people who had conspired to make me complicit in my own humiliation, who had planned to continue their affair after my wedding, who had stolen not just my happiness, but my dignity. They wanted to play games, fine. I'd learned from the best. I called my assistant at Meridian Publishing. Jenna, I need you to do me a favor. Can you compile a guest list for everyone who's coming to my wedding tomorrow? Email addresses, phone numbers, social media handles, everything. Of course, is everything okay? You sound, everything's perfect. I said, and for the first time in days, I meant it. I just want to make sure everyone has all the information they need for tomorrow. Next, I called my college roommate, Priya, who worked as a freelance journalist in New York. Rebecca, oh my God, your wedding is tomorrow. Are you freaking out? I am so excited. Priya, I need a favor, and I need you not to ask questions. Okay. Her voice grew cautious. What kind of favor? I need you to be at St. Michael's Cathedral tomorrow with your camera and your press credentials. Something newsworthy is going to happen, and I want it documented. Rebecca, you're scaring me. I'm not the one who should be scared. The final call was the hardest. I dialed my father's number, knowing he'd be home from his bachelor party planning meeting. Rebecca, sweetheart, you shouldn't be calling me. Isn't it bad luck for the father of the bride to talk to his daughter the night before the wedding? Dad, I said, and my voice broke just slightly. I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, I need you to remember that I love you and that none of this is your fault. Honey, you're worrying me. What's wrong, Daw? Nothing's wrong, Dad. Everything's finally going to be right. After I hung up, I sat in the hotel room silence for a long time, thinking about justice and revenge and the difference between the two. Revenge was about causing pain. Justice was about revealing truth. Tomorrow, I would serve justice with a smile. Well, I woke up at dawn and ordered coffee from room service. Sitting by the window in my hotel bathrobe while the sun painted Washington, D.C. in shades of gold and pink. In 6 hours, I was supposed to become Mrs. James Wilson. Instead, I was about to become something much more powerful, a woman who refused to be anyone's fool. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from my mother. Good morning, beautiful bride, I hope you slept well. I can't wait to see you walk down that aisle today. The flowers are perfect. The musicians are setting up, and I confirmed with the photographer. Everything is exactly as it should be. I love you so much, sweetheart. Today is going to be the most beautiful day of your life. Each message felt like a knife wrapped in silk. At 9, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the last traces of the woman I used to be. When I stepped out, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, maybe for the first time in months. My dark hair, so much like my mother's. My blue eyes, inherited from my father. My face, which had always been called pretty, but never remarkable. Today, I would be remarkable. I drove to the cathedral slowly, taking the long way through downtown D.C. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect wedding weather. St. Michael's Cathedral looked magnificent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayer-made stone. Cars were already arriving. Early guests, vendors, family members getting ready for what they thought would be a celebration. I parked in the lot behind the cathedral and sat for a moment, watching people I'd known my entire life bustle around in preparation for my special day. Mrs. Chin from the Flower Committee, Mr. Rodriguez, who'd been our neighbor for 20 years, James's law school friends, laughing and adjusting their ties. All these people who cared about me, who had taken time out of their Saturday to witness what they believed would be the beginning of my happily ever after. They deserved to know the truth. 2. I gathered my wedding dress, shoes, and makeup bag and walked into the cathedral through the side entrance that led to the bridal preparation room. The small space was already bustling with activity. My matron of honor, Amanda, was hanging up her dress, and my 2 bridesmaids were setting up a coffee station and arranging flowers. Amanda rushed over to hug me. "Oh my God, you're glowing. How are you feeling?" "Like today is going to change everything," I said, and it was the most honest thing I'd said in days. "Where's your mother? I thought she'd be here by now." I checked my phone. No new messages from Olivia since her sickeningly sweet good morning texts. "She's probably at home getting ready," I said. "You know how she likes everything to be perfect." What I didn't say was that I knew exactly where my mother was because I'd been tracking James's phone since last night using our shared account. He'd spent the night at our family home, leaving at 6:30 this morning, probably to avoid being seen by neighbors or my father. One last betrayal for old time's sake. As my bridesmaids helped me into my dress, I felt strangely calm. The ivory silk slipped over my skin like armor, and when they fastened the dozens of tiny pearl buttons up my back, I felt myself transforming into someone new, someone stronger. The dress had been my mother's choice. Of course, a traditional A-line gown with long sleeves, a cathedral train, and enough beadwork to rival a constellation. I'd wanted something simpler, more modern, but Olivia had insisted. "This dress will photograph beautifully," she'd said during the fitting. Classic elegance never goes out of style. Now I understood why she'd been so invested in how I looked. She needed me to look perfect for the photographs that would document her son-in-law's wedding. Amanda pinned my veil in place, the same fingertip-length veil my grandmother had worn. "You look absolutely stunning. Rebecca, James is going to die when he sees you." "I certainly hope so," I murmured. At 11:30, the photographer arrived to take pre-ceremony shots. I smiled and posed, letting him capture what he thought were images of bridal joy, but were actually photos of a woman preparing for war. At 11:45, my father arrived. "Hi, beautiful girl." Dad stood in the doorway of the bridal room, resplendent in his formal black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. At 58, Pastor William Morgan was still a handsome man, tall, dignified, with the kind of genuine warmth that had made him beloved by our congregation for decades. He was also a man whose world was about to collapse. "You look radiant, sweetheart," he said, his eyes growing misty. "I can hardly believe my little girl is getting married." The bridesmaids and photographer tactfully stepped aside to give us privacy. I took my father's hands, these strong, gentle hands that had blessed countless couples, that had held me when I scraped my knees as a child, that had taught me to drive and to pray and to believe in goodness. "Dad, I need to tell you something before we walk down that aisle." "Of course, honey. What is it?" I pulled my mother's journal from my bridal bag and placed it in his hands. "I found this in Mom's car yesterday." He looked confused as he opened it, but I watched his face change as he began to read. The color drained from his cheeks, his lips parted slightly, and his hands began to tremble. "Rebecca," his voice was barely a whisper, "this can't be. Your mother would never read the dates. Dad, read all of it." He sank into a chair, still holding the journal, his eyes scanning page after page of his wife's betrayal. I knelt beside him, my wedding dress pooling around us like spilled cream. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Since yesterday." "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." He looked up at me, this man who had built his entire ministry on the sanctity of marriage and family, and I saw something break behind his eyes. "What are we going to do?" he whispered. "We're going to walk down that aisle, Sumaya," I said firmly. "We're going to let everyone see exactly who Olivia Morgan and James Wilson really are." Rebecca, no. Think about this. The scandal, the humiliation. The humiliation isn't ours to carry. Dad, it's theirs. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him grappling with 30 years of conditioning that said family problems should be handled privately, quietly, behind closed doors. "There are 200 people out there," he said. 200 people who love us and deserve to know the truth before they witness what they think is a sacred ceremony. Your reputation. My reputation will be that I refuse to be made a fool of, that I chose dignity over silence. A knock at the door interrupted us. "5 minutes, everyone," called the wedding coordinator. Dad stood up slowly, his legs unsteady. For a moment, I was afraid he might collapse right there, but he straightened his shoulders and looked at me with something like pride. "You're braver than I ever was," he said quietly. "I learned from the best." He offered me his arm, and together we walked toward the sanctuary doors. Through the glass panels, I could see the cathedral filled with guests, friends and family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with us. The altar was decorated with white roses and peonies, just as my mother had wanted. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's canon, filling the sacred space with soaring melody. James stood at the altar in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking every inch the successful attorney and devoted bridegroom. His best man and groomsmen flanked him, all of them smiling in anticipation. In the front row, my mother sat radiant in her emerald dress, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. She looked like every mother of the bride should look: proud, elegant, overcome with emotion at her daughter's happiness. The wedding coordinator opened the doors, and the processional music began. My bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their soft pink dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar. Then the music swelled into the bridal march, and every person in that cathedral rose to their feet. "Ready," Dad whispered. I squeezed his arm. "Ready." We stepped into the sanctuary, and I felt 200 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Cameras flashed. People smiled and whispered about how beautiful I looked. James's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what looked like genuine love. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, the picture of maternal devotion. What incredible actors they both were. I thought as we walked down the aisle, they should have been on Broadway instead of being in my life. The wedding coordinator opened the doors, and the processional music began. My bridesmaids walked down the aisle in their soft pink dresses, smiling at guests and taking their places at the altar. Then the music swelled into the bridal march, and every person in that cathedral rose to their feet. "Ready," Dad whispered. I squeezed his arm. "Ready." We stepped into the sanctuary, and I felt 200 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Cameras flashed. People smiled and whispered about how beautiful I looked. James's face lit up when he saw me, his blue eyes warm with what looked like genuine love. My mother pressed her handkerchief to her eyes, the picture of maternal devotion. What incredible actors they both were. I thought as we walked down the aisles, they should have been on Broadway instead of being in my life. We reached the altar, and Dad placed my hand in James's before taking a seat, the gesture that was supposed to symbolize one man giving his daughter to another. Instead, it felt like I was being handed over to my enemy. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Jenkins began, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral's sound system. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of James Alexander Wilson and Rebecca Marianne Morgan in holy matrimony." I let him speak, following along with the traditional ceremony, waiting for my moment. James squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back. In the front row, my mother watched with glowing pride. They had no idea what was coming. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. How appropriate, I thought. Let's talk about reverence and God's purposes. If there is anyone present who has just cause why these two should not be joined in marriage, Let them speak now or forever hold their peace. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for, the moment when I could have spoken, could have revealed everything right then and there. Instead, I remained silent. I let Pastor Jenkins continue through the vows, the ring exchange, all of it. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to think they'd won. James, Pastor Jenkins said, do you take Rebecca to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part? James looked into my eyes, his voice strong and clear. I do, forsaking all others. The lie was so brazen it almost made me laugh. Rebecca, do you take James to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, forsaking all others, until death do you part? This was my moment, the moment to say I do, and become complicit in my own deception, or the moment to burn their world down with the truth. I looked out at the congregation, all these faces filled with expectation and joy. I looked at my father in the front row, his eyes encouraging me to be strong. I looked at my mother, still dabbing at her eyes with theatrical emotion. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral sound system, I have something to say first. The cathedral fell into perfect silence. Even the string quartet stopped playing. James's hand tightened on mine, his smile faltering just slightly. Rebecca. Pastor Jenkins looked confused. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said, turning to face the congregation. 200 faces stared back at me, confusion replacing celebration in their expressions. I just realized that before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should probably be completely honest about everything. James's grip on my hand was almost painful now. Rebecca, what are you doing? I pulled my hand free and stepped slightly away from him, closer to the microphone. In the front row, my mother had gone very still, her handkerchief forgotten in her lap. I want to thank everyone for being here today, I began, my voice steady and clear. It means everything to me that you would take time out of your lives to witness what you thought would be the beginning of my happily ever after. Murmurs began to ripple through the congregation. I could see Priya in the back, her camera discreetly positioned. But I've learned recently that happy endings are built on truth, not on beautiful lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues. Rebecca, James reached for me, but I stepped further away. Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair. The words hit the cathedral like a bomb. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Someone dropped their program. In the front row, I watched the color drain from Judge Wilson's face as he stared at his son. I found my mother's journal detailing their relationship. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. 3 months of secret meetings, lies, and betrayals. 3 months of them laughing at how easily they could deceive me. My mother stood up abruptly, her face flushed. Rebecca, stop this nonsense. Sit down, Olivia. The sharp command came from my father, who had also risen from his seat. His voice carried the authority of 30 years of ministry, and my mother sank back into her pew as if she'd been struck. James was frantically trying to salvage the situation. Everyone, please, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Is it a misunderstanding that you spent last night at my parents' house? I asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. While my father was at his meeting, planning your bachelor party, the cathedral erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. James's face went white. Is it a misunderstanding that you've been using our joint credit card to buy expensive wine for my mother, wine that she specifically mentioned loving in her journal entries about your affair? Judge Wilson was standing now, staring at his son with horror and rage. James, tell me this isn't true. James looked around the cathedral wildly, seeing his reputation, his career, his entire life crumbling in real time. I can explain. Oh, please do explain, I said. my voice dripping with false sweetness. Explain to your father, to your colleagues, to everyone who believed you were a man of honor, how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Explain how you planned to marry me while continuing your affair with her. The silence was deafening. Every person in that cathedral was staring at James, waiting for his explanation, and he had nothing. No smooth attorney arguments, no charming deflections, just the truth finally exposed in all its ugliness. In the front row, my mother was weeping, not the delicate tears of a proud mother, but harsh, ugly sobs of a woman whose life had just imploded. "Rebecca," she choked out, "please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, turning to face her. "I understand that you decided your daughter's happiness was a fair price to pay for feeling desired again. I understand that you looked at my fiancé and decided you deserved him more than I did. That's not, you never meant to get caught." The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. My mother crumpled back into her seat, her emerald dress now looking gaudy and desperate instead of elegant. I looked out at the congregation again, family, friends, colleagues, people who had watched me grow up. Their faces showed everything from shock to sympathy to anger. But not one of them looked at me with pity. That was important. I refused to be pitied. "I want you all to know that this isn't about revenge," I continued. "This is about truth. This is about refusing to build a life on someone else's lies. And this is about choosing myself over people who chose each other over me." I began walking down the aisle, the place, my cathedral train sweeping behind me like a queen's robe. As I passed the front row, I stopped in front of my father. "Dad, I'm sorry you had to learn this way, but I'm not sorry that you learned it." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, but his eyes were filled with pride. "I love you, sweetheart. You did the right thing." I kissed his forehead, tasting salt and sorrow, then continued down the aisle. Behind me, chaos was erupting. James was trying to explain himself to his furious father while guests stood and whispered and pointed. My mother was sobbing into her hands while Mrs. Chin from the flower committee stared at her with undisguised disgust. But I didn't look back. I walked through those cathedral doors with my head held high, my wedding dress flowing behind me like a river of ivory silk. The parking lot behind St. Michael's Cathedral was my sanctuary. I stood beside my car, breathing in the crisp October air, feeling lighter than I had in months. The sounds of chaos from inside the cathedral drifted through the heavy wooden doors, raised voices, crying, the scraping of chairs as people stood and moved and tried to process what they'd just witnessed. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts, but I ignored them all except one. "Priya, holy Rebecca, holy actual. Did you get it all? Every second, my editor is going to lose his mind when he sees this footage. This is going to be everywhere by tonight. Good. Are you okay? I mean, really okay?" I considered the question. Standing there in my wedding dress in an empty parking lot, having just destroyed 2 lives and possibly my own reputation. "I'm perfect," I said, and meant it. Within an hour, the story was spreading like wildfire through our social circles. Within 3 hours, it was on local news websites. Within 6 hours, #wedding revenge was trending on social media as people shared Priya's video and dissected every moment of my cathedral confrontation. The reactions were everything I'd hoped for and more. Judge Wilson issued a statement through his law firm announcing that his son was taking indefinite leave to address personal matters. Translation: James's career was over. No law firm in D.C. would touch him after this. Victoria Wilson, James's mother, sent me a handwritten letter that arrived by courier that same evening. "Dear Rebecca, I cannot begin to express my horror at my son's behavior or my admiration for your courage today. You deserved so much better than this betrayal. Please know that you will always have my respect and support. With deepest regrets." Victoria, the congregation of St. Michael's rallied around my father in a way that brought tears to my eyes. By Sunday evening, over 100 people had called or stopped by to express their support and disgust at what had been done to our family. But the most satisfying response came from my mother's social circle. The women she'd spent years trying to impress with her perfect marriage and perfect daughter. Within 24 hours, she'd been quietly asked to step down from her position on 3 different charity boards. Her lunch invitations dried up. Her phone stopped ringing. Olivia Morgan, who had built her identity on being the perfect pastor's wife, suddenly found herself the subject of whispered conversations and shocked stares wherever she went. She tried to call me dozens of times. I let every call go to voicemail. 3 days after my non-wedding, I sat in my father's study, watching him pack boxes with 30 years' worth of theological books and sermon notes. "You don't have to resign," I said for the dozenth time. "Yes, I do." His voice was tired but resolute. "I can't preach about the sanctity of marriage when my own wife made a mockery of it. The congregation deserves better." Dad had aged years in the past 72 hours. The lines around his eyes were deeper, his shoulders more stooped, but there was something peaceful about him, too, like a man who'd been carrying a weight he didn't know was there until it was finally lifted. "What will you do?" "I've been offered a position at a small church in Vermont. Interim pastor while they search for someone permanent. It'll give me time to figure out what comes next." "And Mom?" His face hardened. "Your mother has made her choices. She can live with the consequences." Through the window, I could see Olivia loading suitcases into her car. She was moving in with her sister in Baltimore, the only family member who would still speak to her. "Have you talked to her at all, once, to tell her I'd filed for divorce?" The word hung in the air between us. Divorce? In our family. That word had been unthinkable. My parents had been married for 31 years, had built their entire lives around the idea of "until death do us part." "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be. You saved me from living a lie." He taped up another box, his movements careful and deliberate. I would have gone to my grave never knowing who I was really married to. A knock at the front door interrupted us. Dad went to answer it while I continued packing his books. I could hear low voices in the hallway, then footsteps approaching the study. "Rebecca." Dad appeared in the doorway with Judge Wilson behind him. Harrison Wilson looked like he'd aged as much as my father. His usually immaculate appearance was rumpled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and shame. "Judge Wilson." I stood up, smoothing my jeans. "I'm surprised to see you." "I needed to apologize," he said simply. "For my son, for what he put you through, for what he put both our families through." I studied his face, looking for signs of blame or resentment, but found only genuine remorse. "Thank you, but you're not responsible for James's choices." "Aren't I?" His laugh was bitter. "I raised him to believe he was entitled to whatever he wanted, that his charm and good looks would get him out of any trouble. I created the man who betrayed you." "No, Bo," I said firmly. "You raised a son. He chose to become a man without honor. That's on him." Judge Wilson nodded slowly. "Victoria and I are getting counseling, trying to figure out where we went wrong, how we failed him so completely. Don't let his failures define your marriage." I said, Some people are just broken inside. It doesn't mean everyone who loved them is broken, too." He studied me for a long moment. "You're remarkable. You know that most people would be destroyed by what happened to you. Instead, you're offering wisdom to a foolish old man." "I learned from the best," I said, glancing at my father. After Judge Wilson left, Dad and I finished packing in comfortable silence. As the sun began to set, painting his study in shades of gold and amber, he closed the last box and looked around the room that had been his sanctuary for over a decade. "Any regrets?" I asked. "About the divorce? About leaving?" "No," he paused. "About raising a daughter brave enough to choose truth over comfort? Never." 6 months later, I stood in the gardens behind my new apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, watching spring emerge from winter's grip. Cherry blossoms dotted the landscape like pink confetti, and the air smelled of fresh grass and possibility. My phone rang. Dad's weekly check-in call. "How's Vermont?" I asked without preamble. "Beautiful, peaceful. The congregation here is small but genuine. No politics, no drama, just faith and community." "Are you happy?" "I'm getting there. What about you? How's the new job?" 3 months ago, I'd been offered a position as senior editor at a prestigious publishing house in New York. The salary was substantial, the work challenging, and best of all, it was 300 miles away from the wreckage of my old life. "I love it," I said honestly. "The city, the work, the anonymity. I can walk down the street and just be Rebecca, not that woman from the wedding video." "Good. You deserve a fresh start." The wedding video had eventually faded from viral status, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. But for several weeks, I'd been the internet's darling, the woman who chose dignity over silence, truth over comfort. The attention had been overwhelming, but ultimately empowering. I'd received thousands of messages from women sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking me for showing them it was possible to choose themselves. "Have you heard from her?" Dad asked, as he did every week. No, and I hadn't. Olivia had tried reaching out through intermediaries, my aunt, old family friends, even my former boss. But I'd made it clear that I had nothing to say to her. Some betrayals were too profound for forgiveness, at least not the kind of cheap forgiveness that pretended nothing had happened. Maybe someday I'd be able to have a conversation with my mother, but not today. Not yet. What about James? His attorney contacted mine last month. Apparently, he's in therapy and wants to make amends. I laughed, but there was no bitterness in it anymore. I told my lawyer to inform him that the best amends he could make would be to leave me alone forever. After the call ended, I sat in my garden with a cup of coffee and my latest manuscript, a memoir by a woman who'd rebuilt her life after discovering her husband's 20-year affair. The parallels to my own story weren't lost on me, but I'd learned to find strength in other people's survival stories rather than pain in their betrayals. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reading. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I found a delivery man holding a massive bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I'd wanted for my wedding bouquet instead of my mother's choice of roses and peonies. The card was simple: "For choosing yourself, from someone who understands, a friend." No signature, no return address, but I didn't need one. Over the past months, I'd connected with dozens of women who'd found the courage to leave toxic relationships, to speak truth to power, to choose their own happiness over other people's comfort. We were a sisterhood of survivors, and we looked out for each other. I arranged the wildflowers in a vase and placed them on my kitchen table, where their natural beauty brightened the entire room. Then I returned to my garden, to my manuscript, to the life I was building one deliberate choice at a time. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the Meridian Hotel's grand ballroom, looking out at hundreds of faces: writers, publishers, and readers who had gathered for the National Women's Literature Conference. The nameplate in front of me read, "Rebecca Morgan, keynote speaker, the power of authentic voice." "A year ago," I began, my voice carrying easily through the sound system, "I stood at an altar in front of 200 people and made a choice that changed everything. Not the choice everyone expected me to make, but the choice that honored who I really am." In the audience, I could see women nodding, leaning forward in their seats. My story had become a touchstone for many, not because of the drama or the revenge, but because of the deeper truth it represented. We're taught from childhood that keeping the peace is more important than keeping our dignity, that being nice is more valuable than being honest, that other people's comfort matters more than our own truth. I paused, thinking of that morning in the hotel room when I looked at myself in the mirror and decided to become someone new. But here's what I learned: when you choose truth over comfort, when you choose yourself over people who have chosen to betray you, you don't just change your own life. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. The applause was warm and sustained. After my speech, dozens of women approached me to share their own stories of choosing courage over silence, Authenticity over approval. Late that night, I sat in my hotel room with a glass of wine, scrolling through messages from women who'd watched my conference speech online. Their words were variations on the same theme. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Thank you for choosing truth. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Watched your speech online. Mom would be proud. I stared at the message for a long time. He meant my grandmother. Of course, the woman whose veil I'd worn on my non-wedding day, who had taught me that strength could look like grace, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. But part of me wondered if he also meant Olivia. If somewhere in Baltimore, living with the consequences of her choices, my mother had watched her daughter speak about courage and felt something like pride mixed in with her regret, I would probably never know, and I was okay with that. Outside my hotel window, New York City sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Somewhere in that maze of lights were millions of people making choices, some brave, some cowardly, some that would change everything. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to all of them, but especially to the ones who would choose themselves when the world told them to choose silence. The ones who would speak truth when speaking lies would be easier. The ones who would walk away from beautiful prisons disguised as happily ever afters. Here's to the ones who choose freedom. I thought, even when freedom looks like standing alone at an altar, telling the truth to people who would rather believe the lie. 2 months after the conference, I was in my office at the publishing house when my assistant knocked on the door. Rebecca, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's been waiting for over an hour. Who is it? She says she's your mother. The manuscript I'd been editing slipped from my fingers. 18 months. It had been 18 months since I'd seen Olivia, since I'd spoken to her, since I'd looked into the face that was so similar to my own. Tell her I'm in a meeting. I already tried that. She said she'll wait all day if she has to. I stared out my office window at the Manhattan skyline, at the lives being lived in all those buildings, millions of stories unfolding simultaneously. I thought about all the women who'd reached out to me after my speech, the ones who'd found courage in my story. Send her in. When the door opened again, I barely recognized the woman who walked through it. Olivia Morgan had always been elegant, polished, perfectly put together. The woman who stood before me now was thinner, her hair streaked with more gray than I remembered, her once immaculate clothes slightly rumpled. Rebecca? Her voice was tentative, nothing like the confident tone I'd grown up with. Thank you for seeing me. What do you want, Mom? I kept my voice neutral, professional, as if she were just another author pitching a book. She sat in the chair across from my desk, her hands once adorned with perfect manicures fidgeting in her lap. I saw your speech, the one at the women's conference. Of course she had. The video had gone viral again, reigniting interest in the wedding revenge story. You were remarkable. Is that why you're here, to tell me I performed well? No. She took a deep breath. I'm here to tell you that you were right. About everything. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. The Olivia Morgan I knew would never have admitted she was wrong about anything. I betrayed you in the worst possible way, she continued. I betrayed your father. I betrayed myself in everything I claimed to believe in. There's no excuse for what I did. You're right, there isn't. I don't expect forgiveness. Rebecca, I don't even know if I deserve to ask for it, but I needed to tell you that not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did to you, what I took from you. You didn't take anything from me, I said, and I meant it. You showed me exactly who you are. You showed me exactly who James is. And in doing so, you gave me the chance to become who I am now. Tears filled her eyes. Your father is happier now, isn't he? Yes. I'm glad. He deserves that. She wiped at her eyes. I've been in therapy for a year, trying to understand why I did what I did, why I was willing to hurt the two people I was supposed to love most in the world. And have you figured it out? I was empty, she said simply. I'd spent so many years being the perfect pastor's wife, the perfect mother, that I didn't know who I was anymore. When James started paying attention to me, it was like I suddenly existed again. So you decided your existence was worth destroying mine. No, and I told myself it wasn't really about you, that James was marrying you for the wrong reasons anyway, that I was actually saving you from a worse heartbreak later. She shook her head. The lies we tell ourselves are so much worse than the lies we tell others. I thought about that, about all the lies I told myself in those final weeks before the wedding, that James was just busy with work, that my mother was just excited about the wedding, that the strange feelings I had were just pre-wedding jitters. How is James? I asked, surprising myself with the question. I wouldn't know. He cut off all contact after everything came out. She looked down at her hands. Last I heard, he'd moved to Chicago, started over somewhere no one knew his story. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past 18 months heavy between us. I've written you a letter, she said finally, pulling an envelope from her purse. Everything I wanted to say but couldn't find the words for now. Would you read it? Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of the paper, imagining the words inside, words that wouldn't change the past, but might possibly shape a different future. Someday, I said. She stood to leave, hesitating at the door. You're doing well, truly. I am. I'm proud of you, Rebecca. I always have been, even when I was too selfish to show it properly. After she left, I sat for a long time with her letter on my desk, unopened. Then I slipped it into my bag and returned to my manuscript. The story I was editing was about a woman climbing Mount Everest, facing impossible odds, pushing through pain and fear to reach a summit few had conquered. I knew something about that journey now. 3 years after my non-wedding, I was back in D.C. for a publishing conference. The city felt different now, less like a minefield of painful memories, and more like a place where I'd once lived. A chapter in a book I'd since moved beyond. After my final panel, I decided to walk through Meridian Park, the place where James had first asked me to be his girlfriend. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves turning golden and red, crunching beneath my boots. I was different now, too. More confident in my choices, more comfortable in my skin. The woman who had stood in a wedding dress in St. Michael's Cathedral felt like someone I'd known in another life, a younger cousin. Perhaps, or a character in a novel I'd read long ago. As I rounded a bend in the path, I saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. My father, older now, but still instantly recognizable, feeding breadcrumbs to squirrels. Dad, he looked up, surprise giving way to delight. Rebecca, what are you doing here? Publishing conference. What about you? I thought you were still in Vermont. Just visiting? The church there found a permanent pastor, and I've been offered a position at a small seminary here in D.C., teaching pastoral ethics, if you can believe it. He chuckled at the irony. I sat beside him, and we watched the squirrels dart back and forth, storing away food for the winter ahead. How did you know I'd be here? I asked. I didn't. Just felt like taking a walk through the old neighborhood. He glanced at me. Maybe some things are meant to be. Maybe. I wasn't sure I believed in meant to be anymore, but I believed in this moment, in the comfort of sitting beside my father in the golden autumn light. I heard your mother came to see you. She did. Over a year ago now. Did it help? I considered the question. I think it helped her. I'm not sure about me. And the letter, did you ever read it? I nodded. 6 months after Olivia's visit, on a night when I'd felt particularly strong, I'd finally opened her letter. 8 pages of remorse, explanation, and memories, some beautiful, some painful, all part of the complicated tapestry of our relationship. It didn't change anything, I said, but maybe it helped me understand a little better. Understanding is its own kind of healing, Dad said. He'd found that peace I'd glimpsed in him 3 years ago, a quieter happiness than before, but perhaps a more authentic one. Are you seeing anyone? He asked, changing the subject. Not seriously, I date sometimes, but I'm enjoying my independence too much to rush into anything. Good for you. Take your time. The right relationship will enhance your life, not complete it. Words of wisdom from a man who'd learned them the hard way. What about you? I nudged his shoulder. Any lady professors catching your eye at the seminary? He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. As a matter of fact, there's a biblical literature professor who's been very kind about showing me around campus. Dad, that's wonderful. We'll see. Like you said, no rushing. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? I asked finally. 3 years ago, when everything fell apart. No, he admitted. I thought my life was over. I thought I'd failed at everything that mattered: my marriage, my ministry, even protecting my own daughter. You didn't fail me, Dad. Never. I know that now. He squeezed my hand. And you didn't fail either. Rebecca, you faced an impossible situation with more courage than most people show in a lifetime. I hope you know how extraordinary that was, how extraordinary you are. Coming from my father, a man of measured praise and careful words, this was everything. As we walked back through the park, the path dappled with fading light. I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The pain, the betrayal, the difficult choices, but also the growth, the newfound strength, the authentic connections that had emerged from the wreckage of what was lost. Want to grab dinner? Dad asked as we reached the park entrance. That little Italian place on Connecticut Avenue is still there. They still make that gnocchi you love. I'd like that, I said, linking my arm through his. I'd like that very much. 5 years to the day after my non-wedding, I stood in my apartment in Brooklyn, putting the finishing touches on my first book. It wasn't the tell-all memoir everyone had expected me to write, though publishers had certainly offered enough money for that story. Instead, it was a collection of essays about women who had faced pivotal moments of choice and chosen themselves, some famous, some ordinary, all extraordinary in their courage. My phone rang, displaying my literary agent's number. Rebecca, it's done. We have an offer from Ballantine. They love the manuscript. They love you. And they're offering a 2-book deal. I sank onto my couch, staring at the manuscript pages spread across my coffee table. 5 years of interviews, research, writing, and rewriting, all leading to this moment. That's amazing. They want to rush it for fall publication. Get it out in time for the 5-year anniversary of, of course. The media would never let the anniversary pass unmarked. But this way, at least, I could control the narrative. I could transform what had happened from a viral scandal to something meaningful, something that might help other women facing their own moments of terrible choice. After hanging up, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out a small black leather notebook, my mother's journal that had changed everything. I hadn't opened it in years, but I kept it as a reminder, not of the betrayal, but of the moment I'd chosen truth over comfort, dignity over silence. My doorbell rang. My boyfriend Mark was early for our celebration dinner. I'd told him this morning about the expected book deal, and he'd insisted on taking me out tonight regardless of the outcome. Mark was nothing like James, a high school history teacher with kind eyes and a quiet confidence. He'd never once made me feel like I needed to be anything other than exactly who I was. We'd been dating for a year, taking things slowly, building a foundation of trust that felt solid beneath my feet. You got it, didn't you? He said as soon as I opened the door, reading the answer in my face. Rebecca, that's incredible. His joy for me was so genuine, so uncomplicated. No hidden agendas, no secret motives, just a good man happy for the woman he loved. I did. I laughed as he picked me up and spun me around in the hallway. 2 books, actually. I knew it. I told you they'd be idiots not to snap it up. He set me down. his hands lingering on my waist. "I'm so proud of you." We went to dinner at our favorite neighborhood restaurant, where the owner knew us by name and always saved the corner table by the window. Over wine and pasta, we talked about the book, about his students, about the future, our future. "I have something for you," Mark said as we walked home, the Brooklyn streets alive with the energy of a summer night. He pulled a small box from his pocket. "Mark, it's not what you think," he said quickly. "I know we're not there yet. Open it." Inside was a delicate silver key on a chain. "It's a key to my apartment," he explained. "Not a proposal, not pressure, just an option for whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready." I held the key in my palm, feeling its weight so much lighter than the diamond ring James had given me, and yet somehow meaning so much more. "Thank you," I said, and kissed him under the streetlight, grateful for this man who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can offer someone is the freedom to choose their own path. Later that night, as Mark slept beside me, I stood by my bedroom window looking out at the city lights. 5 years. In some ways, it felt like a lifetime. In others, like the blink of an eye. I thought about all the choices that had brought me here, the painful ones, the courageous ones, the healing ones. I thought about my father, finding new purpose, teaching young pastors about ethics and integrity. I thought about my mother, who sent me a birthday card each year with just her name signed at the bottom. No pressure, no expectations, just a reminder that she was still there, still sorry, still hoping. And I thought about that moment in St. Michael's Cathedral, when I'd stood before 200 people and chosen truth over lies, dignity over shame, myself over everyone who had betrayed me. Some would call it revenge, but I knew better. It wasn't about destroying others, it was about refusing to be destroyed. It wasn't about punishing the guilty, it was about liberating the innocent. It wasn't about the past, it was about claiming the right to determine my own future. I looked at Mark, peaceful in sleep, and at the key on my nightstand, not a demand, but an invitation. Not a chain, but a door. I thought about the last line I'd written in my book earlier that day. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, but liberation. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is choose herself when everyone else expects her to choose silence. And sometimes the best happily ever after is not the one you planned, but the one you create when you finally learn to value your own truth above everyone else's comfort. I slipped back into bed, curling against Mark's warmth, and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would write the acknowledgments page. I would thank my father for his unwavering support, my friends for their loyalty, my readers for their courage in sharing their own stories. And somewhere in a private way only she would recognize, I would acknowledge my mother not for what she did, but for what her actions ultimately taught me, that I was stronger than I knew, braver than I believed, and worthy of a love that didn't require me to diminish myself to accommodate someone else's desires. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the most painful teachers. Sometimes the most beautiful lives are built from the ruins of what we thought we wanted. Sometimes the truest love story isn't about finding the right partner, but about becoming the right person, the person who knows her own worth, who speaks her own truth, who chooses herself again and again until choosing herself becomes as natural as breathing. My story didn't end at that altar 5 years ago. It began there, and I was still writing it, one choice at a time.